Hello, my name is Finn Davis, and I'm going to be doing a speech on gender and sexuality. These are my two index cards, and let's begin. From Bowie to Mercury, from Sappho to Shakespeare, from Jolie to Da Vinci. These are a few of the many LGBTQ people in our history and in our world today. Now, according to a study done by UCLA, 11% of people in the United States experience same-sex attraction. Now, if so many people experience same-sex attraction, why is it that it is such a controversial subject in today's world? Okay, why is it that? What even is sexuality, and why should you care? Now, sexuality and gender are very big parts of world politics today. Only 6 years ago, in 2015, was gay marriage legalized in the United States. Over 100 anti-trans bills were passed in 2021 alone, which is nearly twice as many as 2020. Today, transphobia and homophobia are very prevalent in our society. And today, saying the wrong thing can hurt and offend anyone. Now, 3% of adults identify as LGBTQ, and 11% experience same-sex attraction, as said before, which is 10 million people that identify as LGB, and 10 million people that identify as LGB, and 36 million that experience same-sex attraction. 36 million people that are affected by these world problems. 36 million that are affected by these things that are being debated today. Okay? Now, that's not even counting those that are affected by the people, their friends and families, because they're affected as well. Now, according to Save.org and the Trevor Project, LGBT youth are three times more likely to die by suicide than their straight peers. 41% of trans adults said that they have attempted suicide in their lives. LGBT youth who are not supported by their loved ones are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than those who are supported. You can prevent these deaths by being accepting and tolerant of the LGBT community. You can save those lives. Today, we look to explore the LGBTQ community and the problems that it faces. But first off, what is sexuality? What is sexuality? Now, most people can think of the three main sexualities. Okay, heterosexuality, the sole sexual attraction to a different gender; homosexuality, the sole sexual attraction to the same gender; and bisexuality, the sexual attraction to 2 or more genders. But there are in fact many more. Pansexuality, which fits under the bisexual umbrella, the sexual attraction to 2 or more genders and their genitalia doesn't affect your attraction to them, okay? Now, asexuality is the lack of sexual attraction, okay? Now, this is only covering the sexual side of sexuality. There's also the romantic side, which is heteroromantic, the sole romantic attraction to a different gender; homoromantic, the sole romantic attraction to the same gender; and so on, as it lists before. Aromantic, the lack of romantic attraction, okay? Now, you could mix these two together and be biromantic heterosexual, which means that you are sexually attracted to only the sole gender of a different gender than your own, but you're romantically attracted to 2 or more genders, okay? Now, I personally believe that sexuality is much more complex than this and much more fluid than this. And I think that as we look in the future, we'll see that many more sexualities will be named as of late, okay? Now, if you look at all these sexualities being named, you can come to realize that human sexuality isn't meant to be labeled like this. It's much more fluid than this. In fact, a well-known sexologist and psychologist named Alfred Kinsey, in fact, agreed with me. He created the Kinsey Scale, and which exclusively heterosexual is represented by 0, and exclusively homosexual is represented by 6. Levels of 2 to 5 or 2 to 4 technically, are bisexual, and 3 is 50% heterosexual, 50% homosexual, aka bisexual. Now, I would just like to say that this chart obviously has its flaws. It excludes asexuality and also invalidates asexuals or invalidates bisexuals that may have their attraction to men be at 15% and women be at 85%. Okay? Now, across history, there are stories of LGBTQ people. Okay? They're very sparse, in fact, and this is because of something called queer erasure. Queer erasure is when historians tend to forget about queer people, okay? Now, queer erasure is very prevalent in our society, and you can just simply look at a very famous poet, a Greek poet, in fact, who wrote homoerotic poetry on the island of Lesbos in the year 600 BCE. Her name was Sappho. Now, she is known, in fact, the word lesbian and sapphic, meaning a woman who is attracted to women, originate from her name and her island's name. Now, historians such as Ambrose Phillips, Frederick Welker, and Carl Mueller believed that Sappho's poetry enlisted nothing but a friend affection towards women. And yes, okay. Now, even more modern day history tends to forget about queer people, not just ancient history. Okay, nearly everyone knows who Martin Luther King Jr. is. Now, next to no one knows who Bayard Rustin was. In fact, Bayard Rustin was a very close friend of Martin Luther King Jr., and he was also an African-American advocate for civil rights, and he was a very strong part of the civil rights movement. In fact, he organized the Freedom Riders, an organization and group that worked to desegregate buses and other things such as bathrooms. Okay? Now, Bayard Rustin was very influential, and yet Bayard Rustin was also, in fact, a gay man. Okay? Now, because of this, he tended to work behind the scenes. And we don't learn about him in schools. And schools don't teach about him, yet he was incredibly influential. You're missing out on an entire piece of history that you are missing out on because of queer erasure. Imagine how differently you would view the world if you had never heard of Martin Luther King Jr. Now think about how many other Martin Luther King Jr.'s you're missing out on in this world because of queer erasure. Because of queer erasure, people fail to understand and see that LGBT people are a big part of our society and that they matter. There will always be a stigma around them as long as we have queer erasure. And most schools refuse to teach LGBT-related sexual education. According to the CDC, sexual health education, good sexual health education provides students with the knowledge and skills to help them be healthy and avoid HIV, STDs, and other unplanned pregnancies. Quality sex education programs share many characteristics. These programs address the health needs of all students, including the needs of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth. With this in mind, one could argue that if not for queer erasure, the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and 90s wouldn't nearly have hit as hard. Now, gender is much more complex than sexuality. Most people believe in the gender binary, which means that you believe that people are either a man or a woman. And some people believe that sex and gender are one and the same, which it can be further from the truth. In fact, let me define a couple of things first, really quick. According to a book called The Queeriotic Table, a celebration of LGBTQ+ related culture, by Harriet Dyer, sex is a classification system using biological factors including sex chromosomes, internal genitalia, external genitalia, secondary sex characteristics such as height and hair distribution. There are more than two sexes. Some people believe, some people are born and they do not fit the classical definition of the gender binary, meaning that they're not born as male or female. This is called being intersex. 2% of the world population is intersex. Some people are born in some people are born in a traditionally female body, meaning that they have 2 X chromosomes, a uterus, and a vagina, and that they identify as female. This means cisgender. Cisgender means that you identify as the same as the gender you were given at birth. Okay. Now, some people are born in a traditionally male body, and they may identify as female, or they may be female. And this is called being trans. No one knows why trans people are trans, but it's a very real thing, and it exists. In fact, Ernest Hemingway had a daughter named Gloria Hemingway who was trans, and she lived from 1931 to 2001. Many trans people experience body dysphoria, which is a type of discomfort, and it's usually in a body part, which is usually in a sex organ or sometimes in a secondary sex characteristics, such as Adam's apple or breast. Some people are gender queer, which is an umbrella term for non-cisgender, which means it's anything other than cisgender. There are many other genders that are being labeled as of late that have always existed, just with different names. Agender, meaning that someone doesn't have a gender. Gender fluid, meaning that someone's gender fluctuates. Bigender, meaning that someone's gender identity encompasses two genders. Non-binary, meaning that someone uses they, them pronouns. And pronouns are to be used when you're not using someone's name. Example, Sally went to the store. She bought milk. Now, Sally uses she, her pronouns, which means that she identifies as a woman, okay? Now, when you're using pronouns, you are saying that someone's identity, what someone's gender identity is, okay? All of these identities exist, they're valid, and that is a fact. Now, sex and gender are very complicated issues, as you've just learned, and many do not understand them, which leads to bigotry. And the fact that homophobia is so present in our society should merely push us to make a change, to educate. And I hope that that's what I did for you today. Thank you very much. And here are my bibliography. So yes, there you go.